Hey everyone, sorry I'm not there today. Leo and I got home from basketball practice last night. He wasn't feeling well and ended up with the stomach flu, so we got to deal with that all through the night last night. He is feeling much better today, crossing my fingers that I don't end up sick in the next 12 or 24 hours either, so hoping to be back at school tomorrow. But I do have your sample test here. Oh, also before I forget, if anybody wants to know what's for lunch today, it's General Tso chicken and rice bowl or a turkey and cheese sandwich. So for Brenna and Megan, who usually ask, that's what's for lunch today. Also, I want to show you real quick before I get started going through this, the formula sheet that you will be given tomorrow will look like this. It will have the 3 formulas for volume and also the also the formula for surface area. So as we go through the review, you will see my work in red, answers circled. So for number 1, we're using the formula for volume of a cylinder. The radius is 3, the height is 7. So when you multiply pi times 3 squared times 7, we get 197.92 centimeters cubed. Question 2 talks about a circular swimming pool that has a diameter of 30 feet and a height of 5 feet. So the question is, which expressions can you use to find the amount of water that the swimming pool can hold? So we know we want to do pi times radius squared times height, but remember in this problem you are given diameter. So we need to first calculate the radius from the diameter, so we cut that in half. We're going to use 15 in our formula. So as we look through the answer choices, letter A used diameter instead of radius, forgot to cut that in half. Letter B, they made the mistake that instead of cutting it in half, they doubled it. Letter C is correct. If you take 30 divided by 2, you do get 15. Then we would square 15, multiply that by pi and by 5. Letter D is incorrect. Again, they're using that diameter number instead of the radius, but also in that one, they squared the height instead of the radius. And then letter E is also correct. 15 squared, that's the radius squared, times pi times the height. So your answers are no, no, yes, no, yes. In number 3, we're using the formula for volume of a cylinder, trying to figure out how tall the glass is if we're given the volume and the diameter. So the first thing I did in the formula, you'll see in that second line, is I cut the diameter in half. I'm using 1.5 in the formula. So we plug 56.52 in for volume. That equals 3.14 times 1.5 squared h. So I multiplied 1.5 times 1.5 times pi, and I got 7.065 h. I divided both sides by 7.065 and got 8 inches for the height. Number 4, asked to calculate the volume of the cone. Notice in this problem, you're actually given more information than you need. That 5 feet is labeling what we call a slant height of the cone. That is not a number that we need in our formula. It's not the height of the cone, nor is it the radius. So this formula, 1/3 pi r squared h. So plugging in 1/3, 3.14, 3 and squaring that for the radius, and then the height of this cone is 4. So multiplying all of those numbers together, we get about 37.68 feet cubed. Question 5 is asking you to select any of the solutions that show a correct method for finding the radius of the cup. So here again, we're given volume of a cone, we're given height of a cone, and asked to find the radius. So the formula is 1/3 pi r squared h. And the 2 correct answer choices are A and B. And so really what I want to point out is just the differences. So in letter A, what they do here is they first multiply by 3 on both sides. That cancels out that 1/3. So you'll notice in the next step that 1/3's gone. Then they divide by 6 to cancel out the 6. So they do that on both sides. Then they divide both sides by pi, which cancels out pi. And we end up with r squared is approximately 25. We square root both sides and we get 5. Little more steps in that example, but it still works. You're certainly welcome to just divide everything that you're multiplying by on the left. In letter B, a little bit more efficient because what they do first is combine 1/3 times pi times 6, and that's where 6.28 comes from. Then we just have to divide both sides by 6.28. Again, we get that r squared is approximately 25, and square rooting both sides, we get that r equals 5. Question 6, the answer is B. Question 7, the answer is D. In 6, we're using formula for volume of a sphere, 4/3 pi r cubed, plugging 5 in for the radius, and we get about 523.33 centimeters cubed. Number 7, we're working backwards. We're given the volume and we're asked to find the radius. So I plugged in 7,234.56 in for the volume. I have 4/3 and 3.14, and I don't know the radius. I went ahead and divided both sides by 4/3 and by pi. Remember, when you divide by a fraction, so dividing by 4/3, that's the same as multiplying by what fraction? So remember our rules for dividing fractions. We haven't really done any lessons in that this year, but in 7th grade we did a lot. We did a lot of dividing by fractions. You multiply by the reciprocal. So when you're working in the calculator, because it's difficult if you're not sure how to type in the fractions, or you have to make sure that you're making the decimal repeating if you're going to type divided by 4/3. Instead, you can just do times 3/4. So those two things are the same. Anyway, you get 1,728 equals r cubed, so I cube root both sides, and we get that the radius is 12 meters. Okay, moving on to the rest. In part 2, the first 3 questions, just simple using the volume. On your test, there is also surface area of a sphere. You'll notice there's not any surface area of spheres on this review. It was the very last lesson we did. The questions on the test are pretty simple regarding that, but we have a cylinder, then a cone, then a sphere. So you can pause the video here. You can take a look at numbers that I plugged in, answers I got. I believe on number 3 was the only one where I had to round. I think it was 0.416 repeating, or maybe 0.4186 repeating. But I went ahead and rounded to the 100th. It didn't say, I believe it does say on your test. Can't remember though if it's 100th or 10th. Notice all of my units. Notice all of my formulas written down. Notice that I plugged everything in for you to see. Number 3, the only kind of trick here was that you're given the diameter of that sphere and we need the radius. So I did cut 5 in half, and that's where 2.5 comes from in number 3. In 4, 5, and 6, now you're given volume in all 3 of these instances, and you are calculating the missing length. So in number 4, it's a cone, and we're missing the radius. So you can see plugging in 6 for the height and 100.48 for the volume. Cleaned up the right-hand side and got 6.28. Divided both sides by 6.28 gave me 16. I had to square root 16 and got 4 millimeters. Notice here we're not cubing our units because now we're just going back to finding just a length. Number 5 is a sphere. 4/3 pi r cubed. We don't know the radius. Again, this is similar to the one we just did above, but I cleaned up the right-hand side. Notice my use, though, of that repeating decimal, 4.186 in problem number 5, with that repeating bar up on top. So when I have to divide both sides by that repeating decimal, in the calculator, I typed 150.72 divided by 4.18, and then I typed in 6s until I ran out of room. I'm letting the calculator know that this is a repeating decimal. On the iPhone, you ended up getting 36.0000000, and then I tack a 1 way on the back of that. That's just 36. You're welcome to just say 36. If that happens, or you ever got something like 24.999999, you're welcome to just say 25. But cube rooting 36 gives us 3.30 approximately. I believe after the 0 was a 1 and then a 9, if I'm remembering correctly. So again, I just rounded to the hundredths. It wasn't stated, but you'll notice the volume was in hundredths, so I went ahead and rounded to the nearest hundredth. 6 was pretty straightforward. This time we knew the radius. Those are a little bit easier. We just needed to calculate the height, so I got 3 feet for the height. 7, don't work too hard on this one. So it says we have a cylinder that has 96 cubic inches of pumpkin mix. So it's like a can of pumpkin mix. The question is, how many cubic inches of pumpkin mix could a cone hold that has the same base and an equal height to the cylinder? So remember, we kind of skipped over the explore last week because I was out for that funeral, but when I came back the next day and I had those popcorn kernels and I was showing you that when you pour them into a cylinder, it fills the, or excuse me, yeah, pour them into a cylinder, it fills the cone up 3 times when they have the same base and the same height. It's how the formula is derived, that the volume of a cone is a third of the volume of a cylinder that has the same base and the same height. So all they're wanting you to do here is, if you think about the cylinder, it's 3 times the size, or holds 3 times the amount that the cone does. So you're just taking 96 and dividing it by 3. So we get 32 inches cubed. Question 8 talks about a container in the shape of a cone. So I have the formula for volume of a cone there. We're given the height and asked to find diameter. So be careful here. Another repeating decimal in this problem, 7.326 repeating. Notice the repeating bar there. Please don't drop that or lose that or try to round that number. You should be using that number as is. Remember, we don't round until the very end. So taking 65.94 and dividing it by 7.326, repeating again in my calculator, I'm typing in 7.32 and then a whole bunch of sixes until I run out of room. That did give me 9. That's r squared. So first we have to square root. We get that the radius is 3, but we were asked to calculate the diameter. So now we have to double that. We get 6 inches. Finally, an example about ornaments, again, shaped like cones, 2 congruent cones that are connected at their bases. So I tried to draw a picture there. Each cone is 3 centimeters tall, so that's the height, and has a 2 centimeter radius. You could have done this a couple different ways. I chose to just find the volume of one of the cones and then double it because there are 2 of them. So that's 1/3 times pi times 2 squared times 3, and then that times 2 in the back is, again, because I'm doubling it, and you get 25.12 centimeters cubed. Hopefully you did pretty well on that. Again, here's another look at that formula sheet that you will get tomorrow when we take our test. We are still taking our test tomorrow. If you have any questions between now and then, please reach out. I did assign a couple Khan Academies. There was one already in there called Volume of Cones that I think you might have done last week when I was also gone. But now I've added 2 more in there for you to work just for some extra practice. I don't think that this will take you very long today. So if you have some extra time at the end of class, you can just continue to review notes or your sample test to study. You can work on iReady lessons, but please make sure that you're being respectful and working hard for the sub. See you tomorrow.